Today's topic is a very interesting one, which is a relatively not a new practice in experimentation, but a practice that has gotten unpopular with time, at least in the modern A/B testing space. So, which is selecting the right sample size, and it is a very important step that we need to do when before we start an experiment. And there are various levers that you can play around to actually decide which would be the good sample size to invest in your test. So today we'll be discussing three techniques of tuning the sample size of your test. And I have a lot of puzzles collected for you guys. So I'll just quickly get started. A quick introduction about me. I have been working in VWO in the past 4 years, and I developed their new reports and the new stats engine at VWO. I've been writing uh, a lot about experimentation. I've been speaking to a lot of customers and to a lot of internal people inside Wingify. So I've been teaching in VWO. Finally, I've been solving a lot of customer problems. So that's my source of understanding of the main major pressing issues in A/B testing. And I have been learning and reading from, I learned the course from Ronnie, and I've been reading a bunch of books. So that's my source of knowledge. So I guess my screen is all right. I will be moving forward. Why is this blue screen here? Just a second. Let's present full screen. Okay, great. So a quick intro to today's webinar and the topics that we will be covering. The first topic that we will be covering is how do you select the right MDE. MDE is the minimum detectable effect that we have talked about earlier. So I'll be sharing what does MDE means, what is the core intuition behind it, why you should be editing that parameter, and then what are the tips and tricks to play around with the MDE. Then we will move on to basically selecting metrics with low variance. So I'll explain what is the relationship of variance with sample size. And as it turns out, variance is one of the most important factors that actually cause a lot of problems in A/B testing, like false positives, the very long durations of tests. So a lot of things. I'll explain this relationship, and I'll discuss what you can do about controlling the variance of your test if you have highly fluctuating metrics where tests are very underpowered. And finally, I'll be sharing about changing the decision boundary. So like by default, we take all decisions at 95% or 99%, but there is a math that goes behind how do you choose the decision boundary, what impact does it have on your test, and how you can choose it better to control your sample sizes. So great, I'm getting started. This is the Mentimeter link for today. Please sign in so that we can, so that we can have an interactive session, and we can, I can share my puzzles with you, and you can give answers. So I'm hoping you guys have great. I'm giving 2 minutes here, and then we'll move forward. No? Okay, great. I will paste this link as well on chat. Okay, I think it's fine. It's fine. If someone needs the link, just ping me on chat. I'm seeing the chat. Great. I'll move forward. So we come to the highlight topic of the day, which is selecting the right MDE, and which is the most important parameter that you need to tweak to decide how long will your test run. So MDE is the minimum effect that will be detected in a test if that effect exists. So this if is very important. It is, suppose I'm running a test and I set MDE to be 5%. So what it means is that it says that if there is an effect of at least 5%, it will be detected by with an 80% chance. So 80% chance you can forget for now, it is power. But essentially MDE defines what is the minimum effect that will be detected in your test. So ideally, if you are running a test where you expect very small changes like 1% or 2%, then you need to invest a larger sample size into the test. And if you're running a test where you expect large effects, or maybe smaller effects are not of value to you, there you can expect lower sample sizes. So this figure on the right shows that essentially it's an inverse nonlinear relationship of MDE with visitor count, with the maximum visitors you need. And as you increase the MD, you sort of have lower and lower visitors that you need, and it falls very sharply. So if you reduce the MD, it actually, if you increase the MD, it saves quite a bunch of visitors. So one more thing that we need to share here is that MD is symmetric. So if I set a 5% MD and I get a sample size count of say 20,000 visitors, then that means that 20,000 visitors, I can detect a positive effect of 5%, as well I can detect a negative effect of 5% as well. So either it is, so if I have a 10% conversion rate and a 5% MD, and I get 20,000 visitors, then what it means is that either the winning variation should have more than 10.5% conversion rate, or the losing variation should have less than 9.5% conversion rates. Let me quickly show you how this changes as well by showing you the Evan Miller sample size calculator. So here we have a baseline conversion rate of 10%. Let's move this to relative. I'll explain what is absolute and relative. And as you see, like you increase the MD, you have lesser sample sizes needed. And yeah. So 5% I have 56,000, 4% I have 88, and it rises pretty sharply. So yeah. Now, if there are any questions regarding the MD, please feel free to ask me. So I'm constantly checking the Q&A part. So now the thing is, one very important thing that I want to highlight here is that there are, MD is generally expressed as relative to baseline. So suppose the baseline conversion rate you have is 10%, and the minimum detectable effect that you want to see is 5%. It essentially means a difference of 0.5%, which is 5% of 10%. So when you add and subtract it from 10%, you get 10.5 and 9.5%. So for the most part, for most metrics, you'll only be facing the relative MD value, like relative to baseline conversion rate. In some cases, you might, like for conversion rate, there is a confusion. Like when I say 5% on a 10% baseline conversion rate, do I mean absolute or do I mean relative? When I say absolute, it means that an absolute 5% plus and minus. So that is why the range that you are seeing here is 5% to 15%. But generally, it is relative. But it is a very important confusion that a lot of people get when they are asked that are you talking in relative or absolute. So by default, we always go in relative, and it works for most metrics. Great. No questions up till now. I'm moving forward. Okay. So this was the MD. Now I'll be talking about the tips and tricks where you can actually change and tweak the MD and why you can do that. So firstly, you have some metrics are more sensitive than others. For instance, like upper funnel metrics like engagement rate and like time to convert, maybe time spent on page, or maybe scroll depth. These are metrics that are more sensitive to changes, to some changes, and lower funnel metrics because like revenue and like maybe add to cart rate or conversion rates or order completion rates, they are relatively less sensitive to the change being made because they require a higher commitment from the visitor. So you should prefer selecting higher MDs for sensitive metrics. So sensitive metrics can support higher MDs, and I'll be talking about like in the end of this presentation, like how you should actually you should start with a lower MD and you should subsequently increase the MD of sensitive metrics as you gather evidence. Like for instance, if I'm running a test on scroll depth and I've run 5 experiments, and in every experiment that I see that there is a 10 to 20% uplift, So there I can safely move from 5% to say 7, 8%, 9%. So sensitive metrics show the potential for higher MDs. And this can work the other way around as well, that if you have lesser traffic for your test, you might choose to test on sensitive metrics and not insensitive metrics. So that is one idea. The second idea is that in pertaining to guardrail metrics. So guardrail metrics are metrics that should not be reduced in a test. So for instance, suppose you are designing a new homepage and you want to launch the design for strategic reasons, but you don't want that the conversion rate should be impacted or the page crash rate should be impacted. So for guardrail metrics, uh, you have some guardrail metrics that are very immediate in impact, like for instance, page crash rate, or maybe a number of rage clicks being made by the user. So they are something that as soon as you show it to the user, you see an immediate impact on these. Whereas some are lagged guardrail metrics, for instance, like what is your customer satisfaction ratings and what is the revenue per visitor being earned. So these are metrics that are impacted in a more lagged fashion. If you're running a month-long test, you would want the immediate guardrails to be notified in the next 5 days and the lagged guardrails to be notified when the month ends. So a good strategy is to choose larger MDs like 20, 15, 20% for immediate guardrails, because immediate guardrail metrics, when they break with a significant impact. So if there is some problem somewhere and your page crash rate is firing up, it is likely it won't increase by 2-3%. It is likely that it will increase by a significant amount. And you'll also need to detect it as fast as possible. So there you can choose larger MDs. I'm constantly checking questions if anyone has. Then we have one question that I am usually asked is that is it okay to reverse calculate the MD based on how many visitors to invest? It is totally fine to do that. Like you can have an idea of the duration you want to run the test or how many visitors you want to invest in the test. Then you can reverse calculate the MD, and then you can take a call if this looks like an MD that would be able to include the change that you are expecting. So then you can tune essentially. So if I think in 2 weeks I can get an MD of 6%, and in 3 weeks I can get an MD of 4%, then I might choose to go with 4% or 6%. So you can tune based on your business needs. If you are unsure, in any case, it's always best to start with a lower MD, like the lower side of your expectations. And then as you run more and more experiments, and as you gather evidence that this metric shows higher uplifts, then you can slowly increase your MD. You can go on increasing your MD in subsequent experiments. So that relates to the fifth piece of advice, that is, do not increase the MD after observing a large uplift in a running experiment. So it is generally not advised to update the MD in a running experiment. If someday you have to, then you can take the MD slightly down. That is still fine, because it will give you more power in the test. But what is an absolute disaster is that suppose I run the test, and after first 5 days I'm seeing an uplift of 20%, and I'd set my MD to 5%, and then I increase my MD and change it to 15%. You should absolutely not do that, because the 20% that you are seeing early into the test is likely to be fluke. And by increasing the MD early, you are ending the test shorter. You are ending the test early as well. So you'll be reducing the amount of evidence you have, and you might falsely start believing that 20% uplift was true. So do not increase the MD after looking at test results. That's a very strong piece of advice. This I've already told you, that MD should come from the lower end of expected uplifts. So if you are expecting 10 to 20%, prefer somewhere around 8 to 10% or 5 to 10%, like to give it room. Like if there is a smaller than expected uplift, then it can be detected ideally. Finally, MDs apply to both the positive and negative direction. And this is a very important insight. Why? Suppose I run a test and I do not see I run a test at 5% MD and I do not see a statistically significant result. with that not statistically significant result, if I run it till the end of the maximum visitor count, I can also be sure that there is no reduction greater than 5%. So even if there is a reduction in the target metric, if it was larger than 5%, then it would have been detected in the given number of samples. So that's why MD is symmetric on both sides. And you define it for guardrails, you define it for primary metrics. For guardrails, generally you define what reduction are you okay with. And for primary metric or for success metric, you define how much minimum uplift you are wanting to see. But in any case, in that much sample size, MD is applicable on both sides. So can you repeat why not to increase the MD after observing a large uplift in a live experiment? Okay, so great. Vincenzo has asked a question that can you repeat why not to increase the MD after observing a large uplift in a live experiment? So I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. So what happens is that generally there is a chance that you see a large uplift purely due to fluke, like your metric has a larger variance, or there are some other reasons that suppose there is a lot of different segments with different conversion rates in the background. So there is a chance that you observe a large uplift early into the test. But if you lower down your MD, so if you lower down your sample size based on the large uplift, so suppose I'll take an example why it is wrong. I set an MD of 5%, and it told me that your test should run for 4 weeks. And then in the first 5 days, I'm seeing an uplift of 20%. And so I'm like, okay, let me change my MD to 15%. And probably what it is like is that when I change my MD to 15%, then I reduced the duration of the test that was required from 4 weeks to 1 week. And in the next 2 days, it is very likely that I would not gather enough evidence if my 20% uplift is a fluke. So when you see a larger uplift, the idea is that you should run the test longer rather than shorter, because a larger uplift, so basically it beats the Twyman's law in a way that if the uplift is too large, you should not at that point be reducing the duration of the test. And if you go into the deeper statistics of it, it is called post hoc power analysis. So you get a large sample, large uplift by chance. Uh, it is it is very natural that you think that okay, now I can close the test early. But it is problematic because the causality is the other way around. You are seeing a large statistical significance because you got a fluke random uplift in the starting. If anything, you should be increasing the sample size of the study. I hope, Vincenzo, I've answered the question well. I am not going into too much depth of the question because it requires me to get into deep statistics, which will be very yeah, cumbersome. So thank you. I'm moving forward. So before I move next, so I would want to share some puzzles with you, and might be slightly complicated, or this one is slightly complicated, but this one is on guardrails. So what I want is I've given 4 metrics, and you should I want that you classify these into whether they need a lower MD or a higher MD, and whether they have an immediate impact or a lagged impact. So immediate impact would be where the moment you launch the test, you are likely to see the impact in 2-3 days, and lagged impact is where it takes time. So there are 4 metrics, and I want you guys to select among 5 levels. So 0 being low and 5 being high for MD, and 0 being immediate for time delay, and 5 being lagged for time delay. So yeah. Okay. Anyone wants to take a jab here? Okay, I think maybe this exercise. My point basically was to show here that lagged metrics will always, like we expect these two quadrants to be filled, and we do not expect any of these two quadrants to be filled. So lagged metrics will always have a lower MD, immediate metrics will always have a higher MD. Is immediate is equal to zero? Yes, Vincenzo. Yes, that was my intention there. I am waiting here. Do you guys have an option to put a thumbs up or something? Probably. Is there? I can put a thumbs up. Okay, it does follow. Okay, okay. At least I think we have one more response. Interesting. So yeah, my point with this exercise was basically that we expect lower MDs for lag metrics. We expect higher MDs for immediate metrics. So yeah, I'll move to the next question now. Which is the most sensitive metric among the four that are listed? Which one do you think is the most sensitive metric? Great. I think, yes, scroll depth is the answer. Anyone else giving it a jab? No. Okay. Great. I'll move to the next question. Suppose this one is fine. Okay, we have a response to revenue per visitor. Revenue per visitor, I think, is less sensitive overall. Like in this, I would say scroll depth, form submission rate are the easiest, so the most sensitive to changes. Customer lifetime value is certainly the least sensitive. Revenue per visitor is in between, but yes, I accept it depends on the change. Some changes might directly be picked up by revenue per visitor. So it depends on the change, but in the general scheme, scroll depth and form submission rates are upper funnel metrics. Revenue per visitor and customer lifetime value are lower funnel metrics. So yeah. I'm moving on to the next question. Okay, next question is for after we talk about variance. So we'll move to the next question after we talk about variance. I am coming back to the slides to explain. Great. The next thing that we are talking about now is selecting low variance metrics and understanding the impact of variance. So let me tell this to you that variance is the biggest hurdle you'll face when you are experimenting. So the experimentation pipeline entirely seems to be very straightforward. That you have a change, you show 50% of people the change, you do not show the change to 50% of people, and then you try to measure the performance of both the groups. It sounds very simple. The biggest problem that experimenters face in practice is that the results vary a lot. And that is why in the decision of sample sizes, what matters with MD is essentially the standard deviation. Standard deviation and variance can be understood interchangeably. It's one and the same thing. It's a measure of how much your metric fluctuates. So let me start with a question to explain you the impact of variance. So I was asked this very interesting question that will the sample size change if the revenue is measured in INR instead of dollars? So INR is the value of my home country, is the currency of my home country, and while dollar values are very small in number, like one to like you generally have like $100 can buy you a lot of things, whereas in INR this number increases to 10,000 and 20,000 and so on. So even impact of different changes actually is more on INR, like in absolute numbers if we talk about, and in dollars it's going to be smaller in absolute numbers. So someone asked me this question, that if what matters is the absolute, is the difference, and this is something that I wanted to share. I think I missed in the MD part, that it is the combination of MD and baseline conversion rate multiplied together, which gives you the absolute difference that matters in deciding the sample size. So the question was that if we change the unit of the metric, will the sample size also change? Whereas the metric is practically the same. And it sounds very counterintuitive if it will actually change. So that means you can choose a unit where the absolute value of the metric is lesser to reduce the sample size, which would almost be like a hack. But that does not happen. That sample size does not change if you change the unit of the metric. Like if I start measuring in INR instead of dollars, my sample sizes won't change. And why that happens is because sample size is not decided by the MD with the minimum effect. It is decided by the ratio of MD divided by standard deviation. So when you move from dollars to INR, uh, naturally the minimum effect that you are trying to detect in absolute terms, like changes, like if I'm trying to impact find a difference of 5,000, or say 5,000 rupees, or say $100, uh, the effect size changes, but so does the variance of the effect size also changes. So what I'm trying to highlight here, and if you see in this picture, we have two series which represent samples, one for control and one for variation. The green one is for variation and the red one is for control. The height represents the average value. So this is the effect size. The gap between control and variation is the effect size. And how much do they fluctuate? They represent the variance. So what you can intuitively imagine and think is that if this metric is fluctuating too much, if both of these metrics fluctuate too much in the sense that they start to overlap, so if variance is larger than the effect size, then you'll be less confident about the winner. And if effect size is much larger than the variance, which in this case is borderline, but you can imagine that the effect size can be much larger than how much the metrics fluctuate, then the test will end early. You will have much more confidence. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is that these two are the most important parameters. Effect size in the ratio of how much does the metric fluctuate. So if my effect size is 5% and the metric fluctuates randomly just by 1%, then I'll need a much lower sample size. But if my effect size is 5%, but the metric itself fluctuates by 10%, then I'll need a much larger sample size. So variance is something that you cannot tweak, you cannot directly change. Like MD is something you can select. Variance is not something that you can select. Variance is something that data has on its own. But there are certain things that you can do with variance, and you can utilize knowing about variance. So I'll quickly share those things with you, these important things. So one idea is that the larger idea is that you choose some low variance metrics over high variance metrics. So I'll explain. The first thing that I want to talk about is chaotic variance. So what happens is that there are sometimes variance is contained. So sometimes variance is structured, like something has a spread, but it remains only in that spread. Like suppose something is a normal distribution with some mean, say 0, and a variance of say 1, then it distributes between 0 and 1, and it is sort of contained. So statistics is able to account for that variance. Statistics will adjust that variance for you and give you the right sample size and the statistical significance value. But there is a different kind of variance that cannot be managed. I'll show in the next slide how it looks like. But currently what I'm trying to explain is that suppose different segments have different conversion rates. So suppose I'm serving 5 countries, and India has a conversion rate of say on an average 3%. US has a conversion rate of, say, on an average 6%, and then say China has a conversion rate of 10%, and so on. And they have different variances to themselves as well. And when you are looking at the test, you can be sure that the experiment will ensure that the difference that you are seeing between control and variation is unbiased, because if the experiment is properly randomized. But the variance that you'll see might be very large swings. So actually, if I'm talking about chaotic variance, let me just quickly show you how this variance looks like. And I call it unaccounted variance because it is not accounted in statistics, and it causes your results to swing a lot. And this is something that you should always be careful about. So I'll explain how you can deal with such variances. This is slightly statistical heavy, but I have drawn two cases here. And there is a case one, which is a simple time series, and there is a case two, which is what I am calling a chaotic sort of a variable, which has much more variance essentially. So what I want to highlight here and show you is that if you see that the variance for both is close to 1. So this is the observed variance that I've calculated here, 1.04 and 0.96. So variance is 1 and mean is 0 for both distributions. But if you see actually the values that are shown, they are much different. You see that case 2 has much more outliers, even though the total calculated variance is 1. It has much more outliers. It is much more jagged, whereas the first one is relatively smooth. So statistics expects everything to be like this. In the real world, nothing is like this. In the real world, almost everything is like case 2. I'll explain how I have plotted case 2. So what I did in case 2 is that I created 3 random variables, one with a variance of 0.1, one with a variance of 1, and one with a variance of 4. And then I told it to first select one of these 3. So every time I was going to sample, I was first selecting from one of these 3 variables, which is like selecting from the different countries. Like the next visitor that comes to your test, is he from India or US or China? And then once that variable is selected, then you draw a random value from it, which is the actual revenue that they give into the test. So what I'm trying to show here is that the variance is same in both, but you'll see a lot more false winners in case 2. And sadly, case 2 is the reality. So that is something that I'm calling chaotic variance. If there is any question about chaotic variance, because it's a slightly complicated concept, please ask. I'll explain how you can deal with chaotic variance in the next 2 things. Great. So if you sort of suspect your metrics to be having a lot of outliers, a lot of segments having different behaviors, and your variance is such that your sample sizes are very large, and you expect your false positive rate to also be breached due to this chaotic variance, one thing that you can do is you replace your real valued metric with a binary metric. So I'll explain what are binary metrics and what are real valued metrics. So binary metrics are metrics like conversion rate or engagement rate or bounce rate, where essentially for every visitor, you are just sampling whether they performed an action or not. So they are 0 or 1 type metrics. So binary metrics are 0 or 1 type metrics. Real valued metrics are where an action is being tracked and then a value associated to that action is tracked. For instance, suppose you are tracking revenue. So you are trying to track also that how many people converted on the product, and then whoever converted, what revenue value that they gave you. So you are trying to improve the revenue per visitor of the test. The difference is that revenue can take all sorts of values like $5, $10, $20. It is a continuous real valued scale, and the binary metric is will be contained in 0 or 1. So Vincenzo, that is a good question, and honestly I haven't thought about it this way. Like Vincenzo has asked the question, sorry to break in between. In the case of segments, do you eliminate the most chaotic? I am not sure. Let's take this offline. It is a good question. I'm not even sure how do you identify the most chaotic segment. So I haven't thought about that. So coming back to this thing, binary and real valued metrics. So binary metrics. So the good news with binary metrics is that binary metrics will always have a contained variance. It is very unlikely that you get a lot of shooting outliers in binary metrics. Why? Because the only possibility is 0 or 1. And the variance of a 0 1 type metric is defined directly as a function of the uh, conversion value, so conversion rate. So if I have a 10% conversion rate, it is clear that the variance I have is around 8 9%. If I have a 50% conversion rate, the variance I have is 25%. So it is defined. So anytime you are able to move to a binary metric, you won't face a lot of variance related problems. And every time you have a real valued metric, they might or might not have a variance related problem. So when you detect chaotic variance, one good idea is to switch to low variance proxies, which can be binary metrics for real valued metrics. When we come to questions, I'll also explain you how you can select these low variance alternatives. Great. So the third thing which is related to chaotic variance is that outliers are a form of chaotic variance, and a lot of outliers essentially add add to increase in your false positive rates. They also add to increase in your calculated variance for the test, so they increase the sample size as well. So outliers, if you detect outliers, you should remove outliers and replace them with the mean. Why I say you should not remove, you should replace them with the mean. Why I say replace them with the mean is because you essentially want to retain the counts of any like suppose I showed a test to 1,000 visitors, 100 of them converted. Out of these 100, 10 gave an outlierish revenue value. So if by removing, I would actually change the statistics. I'll say that only 90 converted out of 1,000, whereas actually 100 converted out of 1,000. So I should not remove them. I should replace them with the mean to nullify their effect. So that is a good strategy that you can follow to deal with chaotic variance. Now, if there are any questions on variance before we move to the puzzles. We are good? Okay, great. So, some questions again. So, on variance. Firstly, to grasp the concept of variance, here I am sharing this tab. Firstly, to grasp the concept of variance, I have this question that which of the following has the largest the largest options, the largest variance. Which, so if you think about these three metrics, like travel time in a high traffic city, or change in weather after rain. So what is the progress of uh, the change in temperature or the change in coolness after rains, and then change in food temperature upon heating. So which of these and all three are essentially like some metrics with some variance when you have different runs. So which one do you think has the highest variance? Great. So that is the answer that I also had in mind. And progressively, if you think about it, travel time has the highest variance because traffic can vary from time to time. And change in weather after rains has some variance. It doesn't directly go up, it is jagged, but it is mostly like smoother. Like when there is a rain, the temperature does cool down. Then finally, change in food temperature upon heating is almost smoothly monotonic. So when I increase the temperature of my food while I'm cooking, it goes slowly and slowly and slowly up. So that's why I say that uh, travel time in a high traffic city has the highest variance. Change in food temperature has the lowest. I'll move to the next question, and this one gets interesting. What is a good low variance proxy for time spent on page? I have made deliberately, I've made the options to be slightly confusing. So please take a jab. Then I'll talk about all four and I'll give my reasoning on why one is good or the other is good. Interesting. Yeah, I think this is the right answer, that engagement rate would be a good low variance proxy. I'll explain why others. So, what I want to highlight here is that first thing, that if you want to switch from a real valued metric to a binary metric, obviously, yes, the real valued metric will have much more information. So, it is valuable to stick with it if you have enough visitor count. But if your visitor count is actually lesser and you want to deal with this variance related and chaotic variance problems, then the good idea is that you set a threshold on the real valued metric, and you say that everyone below this threshold is 0 and everyone above this threshold is 1. So that will convert your metric into a binary metric. Bounce rate does the same thing, but in the opposite direction. So bounce rate is qualitatively similar. It will be low variance. It will be directly related to engagement rate, but it will be opposite. So that's why it is inverse of time spent on page. Conversion rate on CTA will be much less sensitive, and it will not be exactly a good proxy. So it will be binary, but not a proxy. Number of page interactions can also be is also related to time spent on page. Naturally, if I'm spending time on page, I'll be doing something. But the problem with number of page interactions is that it is also a real valued metric. So you are not gaining anything. So it's not low variance. So great. I'll move to next such question. What is a good low variance proxy for revenue per visitor? Have I made the options like too hard? Is okay. I am waiting. Okay, great. Uh, Great. So yes, that is the answer I also had in mind. Order completion rate. Revenue per visitor. So essentially, order completion rate can be a good metric, like how many visitors are actually completing the order and not. And it is binary. Add to cart rate is one level above in the funnel, so it is not exactly aligned to revenue per visitor, because a lot of people who add to cart might not complete the order as well. Average order value is a good proxy, but it is not low variance because it retains the real valued nature of the metric, and refund rates are actually sort of opposite, and but they are quite unrelated to revenue per visitor. So sort of related, but yeah, not a very good proxy for the metric. One last question of this type, and this is the hardest. I say. Think about this. I'm giving 2 minutes. What is a good low variance proxy for search depth? And so let me explain the scenario. The scenario is that a company is trying to optimize their search, and what they want is that the user should not go to many pages. So if some user is going to the fifth page to get his result, then the search depth is 5. If they are going to the fourth page to get their result, the search depth is 4. So what can be a good binary alternate or a low variance proxy for search depth? Yes, this was hard, but I think people have like you have gotten the right answer. That first result click rate is it is complicated because it will be very less sensitive. Uh, but I placed it specifically here that as you improve your search rankings, the ratio of people collecting on the first clicking on the first item will increase. So it is a good proxy. The other options that I added was success rate, that whether a user clicked on an item or not. That was one. That is sort of related but not exactly related. So that is one thing. Then we have repeat search rate, which is not related to search depth at all. It is essentially trying to show you that the user did not get the result at all from his query, so he probably gave up and did a search again. Session duration would have been a good proxy, but it is not low variance because it is again a real valued metric. So first result click rate is what I also had in mind. Thank you. I'll move to now. I think the next question is on the next part. So now we have 15 minutes left. I'll be moving to one last part of this webinar, and I hope you find it valuable. So this is the last lever that we can adjust to set our sample sizes and to play around with accuracy as well. So setting the decision boundary of the test. So by changing the decision boundary of the test, you can essentially change the sample size requirements as well. You can essentially control the accuracy of the test as well. So while up till now we were trying to trade off between the effect that can be detected and the sample size that is needed, this last lever will help you essentially to play around with accuracy and the sample size. So naturally, for higher accuracy, you need a higher sample size. So let me explain this to you quickly. Uh, False positive rate, how do you define false positive rate? Is that FPR is the chance that you will get a winner in an AA test. So if you run an AA test, what is the chance that you will get a winner in that? And what I mean by AA test is not strictly an AA test, but any time that there is no impact on the target metric. So if I make a change and there is no impact on the target metric, then I can say that, then I'll essentially say that I'm saying that it is practically an AA test. And there is a FPR percentage chance that I'll get a winner if there is no true impact on the target metric. So now this is very interesting that this false positive rate directly coincides with the boundary that you are making for your decision making. So if I say that I'll call out a winner at a probability to beat baseline of 95% or like statistical significance of 95%, then it means that the 5% chance that is left will be your false positive rate. So if I run 100 AA tests with a 95% boundary, then there is a chance that 5 of them will give a winner. So now so now another very important point about false positive rate is that depending on the setup, you can have a one-sided or a two-sided setup. So I'll explain this t-statistic distribution for an AA test. What this blue bell curve is trying to show you is that suppose that it is an AA test, so there is no true impact. Then how can you expect the uplift to be distributed? So t-statistic you can consider to be a proxy of uplift. More specifically, it is a proxy of uplift by your variance, sort of by standard error, which is a form of variance. So the relationship that I was talking about, MD divided by variance, that is the same relationship that defines the t-statistic, which is what is the uplift relative to the variance in the result. So you can assume it that way. So a zero uplift has the maximum chance that you see a zero uplift in the test. As you go to the positive side or the negative side, the chance decreases. This blue area is what I'm cutting down to 5%. So this blue area is 5% for me. So what I say is that the test can either be one-sided. When I say that I'll only take a deploy decision for a variation, I'll never disable a variation. So what this means is that I'll not stop the test until maximum visitors are reached. If a winner is found, I'll deploy it, or else the test will keep running. That is a one-sided test. And if you set a 5% false positive rate, then you can assume that there is a 5% chance that you'll get a false result from the test. A two-sided test can be of the type that, okay, if I get above 95%, I'll deploy a winner. If I get below 5%, I'll disable the variation. So this can be interpreted in other ways also. So if control can win in your test, if only variation can win, it means you are running a one-sided test. If control and variation both can win, which will lead you to stop the test, it means that you are running a two-sided test. So whenever you are running the two-sided test, then you need to add up both. So you need to add up the residue that is left on the winning side and on the losing side. So here the false positive rate would be 10%. So this is the very crucial thing that most people get wrong with, and it's a very confusing concept in statistics. What I generally recommend you is you take a call that if you'll stop the test based on a signal when there is no winner or control is winner, or you'll either stop the test only after maximum samples have been reached, or you'll deploy the winner. If there is only of these two possibilities, then you are essentially running a one-sided test if disable is not an option. So this is how you calculate the false positive rate. Naturally, as you decrease the false positive rate, the accuracy of your results increase. But there is a very important concept here, and this is not talked about enough. False positive rate is not the chance that your winners are false. So there are two things. One is that if there is no impact in your test, what is the chance you get a winner? And the other question is that if there is a winner, what is the chance that there was actually no impact in the test? And both can have widely different answers. So I'll explain that with the help of a puzzle. So puzzle time, guys. If there are no questions right now, let's move to the next puzzle. And this is slightly mathematically inclined, but I request you guys to try taking a jab at this answer, because I'm trying to build an important concept here, which will be really valuable at understanding what false positive rate is and what it is not. So the question here is that you have 100 AA tests, you have a 5% false positive rate. How many of these will be winners? Assume a one-sided test. So how many winners will you get in this test? You are running 100 AA tests. So how many of these AA tests will end up being winners? Assume a one-sided deploy side. So you don't need to double the false positive rate. Are you there? Or people are calculating? Okay. I'm repeating again for anyone thinking. One-sided FPR of 5%, 100 AA tests. How many of these AA tests are going to win? The options are 10, 5, 1, or 15. Have I been able to explain it correctly? Should I give the answer, guys, or are you calculating? So okay, I'll move forward. I think this got slightly convoluted mathematically, but okay, I'll move forward. The answer here is 5 AA tests will win. Why 5? Because 100 AA tests were running, and there was a 5% false positive rate. So 5 out of 100 AA tests will win here. Moving on to the next question in this series, and I'm trying to build a concept here. So next question is slightly complicated, and if the first one was complicated, then this one is going to be more complicated. But now you ran 100 AA tests and 10 AB tests. Now these 10 AB tests, what I'm talking about is that they are true winners. So suppose you had some magic machine, you know that these 10 tests that I've run are true winners and they have larger than MD impact. And you can assume that there is 100% power. So no test with a winner will be missed, with a true impact will be missed. And the false positive rate is still 5%. So how many winners can you expect in this setup? Okay, we are short on time. I'll move forward. I'll give the answer. I think this has gotten mathematically heavy, but I'll move forward. So basically, in this, you will get out of those, how many are false winners? No? Did I ask wrong? Yeah, false winners, you can say. Okay, the question is confusing. Okay, Vincent. So I'll definitely improve the question. I'll explain the idea here, at least what I was thinking. So out of 100 AA tests, you'll get five false winners, which is the false positive rate. Out of those 10 A/B tests that you see, which are true winners, which you know in advance that they have the desired impact. So all those 10 will come out to be winners. So you'll essentially be seeing 15 winners out of these 110 A/B tests. Now the question is very interesting that in this setup, roughly what is the chance that a winner that you get in the test is false? So I will take you forward, and this highlights a very important concept. So we set the false positive rate to be 5%. But now we have received the winners. So as I will remind you, you received 15 winners in the whole 110 tests that you ran. Out of those 15 winners, we know that 5 are false positive because they are from those 100 A tests, and 10 are true winners because they are from 10 A/B tests. So naturally, you won't know this in a real setup, but in the simulational setup, we know that. So if in those 15 winners, only 10 are true winners and 5 are false winners, very close. So yeah, the chance that a winner is false in the previous case, you are right, is 33%. So this term, why I wanted to tell you this, and you've gotten this right, Vincenzo. Um that basically what I wanted to highlight here is that you should always keep your false positive rate low, because false positive rates are sort of determine that if there is no impact, what is the chance you'll get a winner, whereas the quantity that you are concerned with, or most experimenters are concerned with, is that if I get a winner in the test, what is the chance that it is a false winner? And this number, depending on what is your proportion of AB and AA tests, this number can be widely different. So in our case, because we have a very high case, 90% chance of 92% chance of it being a AA test rather than a AB test, you see a very high false positive risk. So this term is called false discovery rate or false positive risk. For our case, it was 33%. We'll talk more about this term. The recommendation right now is to set a low false positive rate, never increase it above 5%. So now, any questions or anything that we have? I have 2 minutes. I'll be closing in 2 minutes. Okay, sorry. Before we move to questions, I have just one last bonus tip to share with all of you. And then we'll go to the questions that you guys might have. So bonus tip is that when you create a metric, so suppose you are running an experimentation program and you decide to create a metric and save it on your platform, you should decide the relevant statistical parameters there and then and save it with the metric if the platform allows it. Or if you are building your own platform, you should design it that way, because generally you can save good statistical defaults with a metric and they are rarely changed. Then you can review once in every 3 months if you want to change the statistical parameters. So suppose I start with a sensitive metric, say time spent on page. Earlier, when I start, I have no evidence, so I set an MD to 5%. After 3 months, I have run, say, 10 experiments on that metric. And I see consistently that I see an uplift of 10 to 20% on that metric. So now I'll review and I'll update my statistical parameters for this metric. Then suppose I find different other metrics which are very chaotic. I'll set them at a lower false positive rate to reduce the false winner risk. So this is a strategy to refine your metric and statistic selection. And this is how you should build your metric collection in the larger experimentation run. So that was all for today, guys. I hope it was insightful. And yeah, any questions? I'm all interested.